In this video, I'm going to be talking about the reality of living on a budget in Australia during the cost of living crisis in 2025. A quick Google search will show you that Australia is easily one of the most expensive countries to live in, with an average weekly cost of $2,200 a week for a household, which includes rent, food, insurance, utilities, entertainment, and other financial services. Every family will have different expenditures and habits that may add up or lessen the value of money spent every month, but it is safe to say that the biggest factor that most Australians suffer from is rent and accommodation. Even though I'll get into the details of our situation later in this video, I quickly want to say that my family would be in a very stressful situation if we weren't able to live and rent on my wife's parents' property, because even with the rent that we pay for having a small house in the countryside, there's so many factors, cost of living in Australia that adds up every month. It would be near impossible to live comfortably without being lucky and in a position where your rent isn't as high as the average cost in Australia. I also realized that the cost of living can drastically change depending on the location of your dwelling. For example, living in Sydney will be significantly different in cost compared to that of an empty countryside town in Queensland. But from my own experience, when you compare living costs with a country like Japan, for example, its price difference is night and day. And I'll be making another video about my example of living in Japan versus living in Australia and the cost of living breakdown for that as well. Every family will spend money differently, so it's hard to find the best way to really try to budget. Sometimes, especially if you have kids. But in this video, I want to share our situation and how we try to budget our expenses while living in the countryside. The biggest factor in how we are actually able to afford living in Australia, as I said, is because we're lucky enough to have built a small house on my wife's parents' property, and we pay rent every fortnight. This is the biggest factor that significantly helps us budget other aspects like insurance, food, petrol, and other things. If our monthly rent exceeds what we pay now, we would probably consider moving to Japan because cost of living in Australia is a lot higher in a lot of ways. I really don't know how other families are able to afford rent today because not only does it seem hard to find affordable rent, but it also seems like a very competitive market, especially in Queensland. Because we're currently living in the countryside, my family and I are able to find small ways that we can budget our expenses. We are able to grow and eat a lot of our own fruits like lemons and limes and passion fruits and vegetables like cucumbers and pumpkins. And also having our own chicken also saves a lot of money on eggs. Even though we pay about $50 AUD per month on 2 bags of chicken food, we get about 12 dozen eggs a month and are able to sell some of the eggs to our neighbors that helps us cover the cost of chicken food. So not only are we able to eat free-range eggs that are really yummy and healthy, having our own chickens essentially pays for itself. And even when we have our grocery runs, we go to local veggie shops that sell a lot of cheap veggies in bulk that help us lower the cost of groceries. But we try to stay away from buying too much of our groceries at places like Woolies and Coles and go towards more budget-friendly shops like Aldi and Fresh and Save and buy a lot of off-brand or generic brands. Also in Australia, cans are also recycled for 10 cents a can, which is pretty high in my opinion. Whenever we have a big load of cans, we go to recycle centers and use the money to get on groceries or chicken food, and that definitely helps out a bit as well. And I think one of the biggest ways to save money is actually not to eat out as much. That's something that I have a very difficult time doing because I love eating out and going to restaurants and eating at a fish and chip shop by the beach. Australia, unfortunately, has a very high price point for eating out. Even at fast food like McDonald's, it's very expensive. It's about $15 to maybe even $20 for a meal. Paying such a premium price for fast food is something that really scares me. When it comes to saving money on diapers for a toddler, we're able to use reusable fabric nappies that we squirt off when they get dirty before putting them in the washing machine. And having a garden right outside makes it easier for us to squirt the dirty nappies onto the grass or garden. Like many houses in the countryside in Australia, we use a tank to collect our rainwater. By doing this, we're able to save costs on water, and when we use the water for the garden, we get it out of the dam, and we can use as much water without worrying about cost or running out. Ultimately, I think living in the countryside definitely helps us fight the cost of a lot of things. That being said, we're very lucky to be in this situation because a lot of people who are fighting rising costs are most likely in the city and must be difficult finding shops or situations that can help live a budget lifestyle. Let me know what your situation is living in Australia and how you're able to save or budget your expenses right now. And hopefully I'll be making more videos in the future talking about the in-depth of how much everything costs in my situation. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.